Hey guys, tonight we're putting on our finest lace gloves, dusting off the top hat, and stepping right into the politely unhinged world of Victorian leisure. This is not Jane Austen's garden party, and it's definitely not Downton Abbey. Tonight, you'll discover what fun meant to people who thought table legs were scandalous, believed a brisk walk could cure tuberculosis, and measured social status by the circumference of their mutton chops. So, before you collapse onto your suspiciously modern mattress, take a second to like the video and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy being gently bullied by history while trying to fall asleep. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and whether your neighbors are currently ice skating in the street, Victorian style. There's always one. Now, dim the lights. Switch on that fan for the softest possible background noise, very on-brand for the Victorians, who would have classified the ceiling fan as sorcery, and wriggle into the most uncomfortable sleeping position you can muster for historical accuracy. Let's get curious for a second. Have you ever wondered what Victorians did when they weren't inventing new ways to repress their feelings? What did people do for fun before television, memes, and Google? Did anyone actually enjoy lawn tennis? Or was it just elaborate foreplay? Was every picnic an episode of survival? Did children really play with hoops? Or was that just code for running away from responsibility? If you had to survive a parlor game with your in-laws, could you escape with your dignity? Would you last a single afternoon at a Victorian seance? Or would you accidentally start a ghost panic? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1872, you're wearing 7 layers of wool, your hair is full of pomade, and someone is insisting you join a game of charades that will take 3 hours and ruin at least one friendship. Good luck. It's Saturday, and you're being herded onto a train with a basket containing more cutlery than food. Victorian picnics were a test of stamina. Carry your meal, your chair, and your sense of dignity into the wild. Then battle nature, relatives, and mayonnaise-based tragedy under the suspicious gaze of a passing sheepdog. Let's set the scene. It's 1876, and the latest trend in leisure is to haul your entire dining room into a field and pretend to enjoy the great outdoors, all while wearing 3 layers of wool and enough starch to defeat a small nation. You've barely had your morning tea, but Aunt Euphemia is already insisting the best picnic spots will be gone by 10 a.m. Spoiler: there are no best spots, only slightly drier patches of grass, most of which have been recently vacated by cows with poor digestive habits. Victorian picnics are not for the faint of heart. Your supplies include a wicker hamper large enough to conceal a medium-sized child, a folding table, 6 porcelain plates, 17 knives, an unidentifiable meat pie, and exactly 0 napkins. Your only defense against the elements is a tartan blanket and the vague hope that it won't rain until at least the first course. The journey alone is its own Olympic event. You jostle for space on a train carriage filled with other families, all of whom are pretending that lugging 30 pounds of cutlery uphill is part of the fun. By the time you reach the picnic site, your arms are shaking, your hat is crooked, and you're fairly sure your sandwich has developed a personality. Arriving at the chosen field, you discover the only level patch is already occupied by the Wilkinsons, who have erected what appears to be a military encampment, complete with bunting and passive-aggressive comments. No matter. You stake your claim near a suspicious-looking thistle, send the children off to chase imaginary butterflies, or more likely, trouble, and begin the elaborate process of setting up lunch. You unfold a tartan blanket, immediately covering at least 1 molehill and 2 mysterious damp spots. Then commence the ritual of unpacking. Every single food item is meticulously wrapped in several layers of cloth, parchment, and what may or may not be someone's petticoat. There are no fewer than 3 types of sandwich, each one containing cress, and all taste faintly of disappointment and damp bread. As you arrange the feast, disaster looms on every horizon. Wasps arrive the moment the first jar of jam is unscrewed. Bees circle menacingly around the lemonade, and a cloud of midges forms directly above the pork pie, as if summoned by ancient rite. The wind picks up, sending lettuce leaves tumbling down the hill and your best bonnet into a nearby bush. No one dares mention the potato salad, which has been sitting in the sun since sunrise and is now a sentient, possibly vengeful entity. Now, the eating. Victorian etiquette demands that you eat with grace, no matter how many insects are invading your collar or how much grass has found its way into your sausage roll. You balance plates on your knees, attempt to drink tea poured from a wobbly tin kettle, and try to ignore the creeping suspicion that your sandwich was previously occupied by an ant colony. The conversation is predictably dire. Uncle Horace lectures everyone on the Crimean War. Someone's dog eats half the cheese, and a child is discovered in tears after being outwitted by a goose. Inevitably, the sky darkens. A single ominous drop of rain lands squarely on the pork pie, signaling the beginning of the end. In a frenzy, everyone leaps into action, repacking the hamper with uncharacteristic efficiency, flinging leftover sandwiches to the ducks or to the Wilkinsons who are still judging you, and sprinting back to the train with all the grace of a herd of startled sheep. And so, you survive another Victorian picnic. Drenched, sunburnt, lightly grazed by a rogue sheepdog, but victorious. Because in the world of Victorian fun, survival was always half the point, and the other half was having a story to tell at next week's tea party. Welcome to the lush green battleground where courtship and competition collided, lawn tennis. Here, every awkward serve is a coded message, every volley a declaration of intent, and the only thing more dangerous than a flying ball is a double entendre lobbed across the net. You find yourself in the garden of an estate. Freshly mown grass crunching under shoes polished to a mirror shine. Surrounded by hydrangeas, gossip, and enough repressed desire to power a small factory. The year is 1885. And you, brave Victorian, have just been handed a tennis racket that weighs approximately as much as a modest family sedan. You are wearing clothing designed by someone who thought athletic was a medical diagnosis. For women, it's a floor-length skirt, corset, bustle, and possibly a hat large enough to shade the entire county. For men, it's stiff collars, wool trousers, and the faint but persistent hope that you will not perish of heat stroke before the first set is done. Let's begin with the rules, which are simple. Try to hit the ball, but not too well, or you'll appear unseemly competitive. Try to lose gracefully, but not too obviously, or you'll look like you're flirting. Or are you supposed to look like you're flirting? Is this a date or a death match? No one really knows. But everyone pretends they do. The real competition is not for points, but for status, attention, and, if you play your cards right, an invitation to stroll by the rose bushes later. The game begins. You stand at the baseline, racket poised, pretending you understand what love means. Hint, it's 0, both on the scoreboard and in your personal life if you miss this serve. You attempt a gentle underhand swing, aiming for nonchalance, and instead producing a shot so limp it's intercepted by a passing bumblebee. Your opponent, Miss Prudence Witherington, returns the ball with a demure little hop and a smile that could curdle fresh cream. Every movement is layered with subtext. When she adjusts her glove, she's sending a signal. When you fumble your racket, you're broadcasting nervous availability to half the county. Spectators line the edges of the lawn, pretending to be interested in technique, but actually cataloguing every blush, every giggle, every accidental collision at the net. Social commentary is sharper than the grass clippings. Mrs. Farnsworth whispers to her neighbor, "Did you see the way he handed her the ball? Scandalous." Meanwhile, the vicar, drafted as umpire, is still working out how to keep score without being excommunicated. You quickly realize lawn tennis is less about athletic prowess and more about public performance. Victory is sweet, but not as sweet as a shared laugh, a lingering glance, or the rare thrill of catching someone's gaze across the service box and knowing, just for a moment, that they're not thinking about scones. The actual tennis is a kind of structured chaos. Balls ricochet into shrubbery, hats fly off, someone's dog absconds with a ball and is chased by 3 giggling debutantes. The game pauses often, ostensibly for refreshments, but actually so people can collapse discreetly into deck chairs and swap updates on whose courtship is advancing and whose is back at deuce. Every so often, a player will summon a burst of actual skill, producing a serve that zings down the line and sends hearts fluttering. But show too much athleticism and you risk accusations of vulgarity or, worse, being invited to play with the professionals next Saturday, where the only flirtation is with actual heatstroke. At the end of the match, everyone gathers for lemonade, congratulating each other on games well played and jokes well landed. The losers are gracious, the winners are humble, and everyone is exactly as sweaty as etiquette allows. You leave the lawn tennis court with grass stains on your cuffs, a new appreciation for coded conversation, and the sneaking suspicion that the true prize wasn't the game at all, but the quiet promise of a note slipped into your glove when no one was looking. That, and maybe a slightly bruised ego from being outplayed by someone in a hat the size of a picnic table, you arrive at the beach, desperate for fun and possibly a new respiratory disease. Prepare to change into a full wool swimsuit inside a rolling wooden shed, then be wheeled directly into the ocean by a horse. Because nothing says leisure like nearly drowning in the name of modesty. The Victorian seaside holiday is a grand tradition. Equal parts, health advice, fashion crisis, and slow-moving public spectacle. Your physician has prescribed sea air for everything from headaches to heartbreak. So off you go to the coast, along with every other person who owns a parasol and a vague sense of adventure. You step off the train into the salty chaos of Brighton or Blackpool, greeted by 1,000 vendors hawking boiled sweets, questionable sausages, and postcards featuring daring displays of ankle. But before you can even think about dipping a toe, you face the greatest engineering marvel of the 19th century. The bathing machine. These wooden contraptions line the shore like a fleet of tiny pirate ships, each painted a cheery color and smelling faintly of wet dog. You're ushered inside by an attendant, usually a stern matron whose sole purpose is to make sure you do not accidentally glimpse your own knees. There's barely enough room to turn around, let alone wriggle out of your clothing and into your bathing suit, which, for women, is a voluminous, floor-length woolen affair with built-in weights and enough ruffles to sink a medium-sized boat. For men, it's a striped unitard designed to show off exactly nothing and guarantee maximum chafing. Once encased in fabric and regret, you signal the dipper, a sturdy local armed with a horse and a distinct lack of mercy. The whole machine is rolled down the beach and into the surf, bumping over sand, shells, and the lost dignity of previous bathers. At the appointed spot, just beyond the range of prying opera glasses, you emerge from your portable changing closet and enter the bracing waters of the North Sea. The cold is immediate and aggressive. Your bathing cap fills with ice water, your toes go numb, your soul leaves your body and floats off toward the pier. Meanwhile, onshore, the scene is only slightly less absurd. Crowds gather on the promenade, sipping tea, holding onto their hats, and pretending not to notice the parade of red-faced swimmers being dragged back onto dry land by their bathing machines. Children dig holes with alarming commitment. Elderly relatives construct elaborate windbreaks out of tartan rugs and ancestral disappointment. Every so often, a brass band erupts into a rousing tune, which is only occasionally drowned out by the cries of someone discovering a jellyfish in their drawers. The fun isn't limited to swimming. No Victorian seaside outing is complete without a healthy dose of organised entertainment. There are donkey rides for the children, though it's debatable who's less enthusiastic. The children or the donkeys. Punch and Judy shows gather crowds of shrieking youngsters, all learning valuable lessons about puppet-based domestic violence. Fortune tellers offer to read your palm and tell you that you will soon contract a mild but character-building illness, while entrepreneurs sell questionable remedies for sea cough, which is really just the common cold with a better marketing team. Of course, all the fun comes at a price. Sand. It gets everywhere. In your shoes, in your scones, in places your bathing machine attendant warned you never to mention in polite society. The relentless grit is a reminder that, despite all technological advances, the British seaside remains undefeated in its ability to infiltrate your undergarments. As the sun sets, you gather your possessions, now at least 40% heavier with damp wool and emotional baggage, and trudge back toward the station. Your hair is salt-stiff, your face wind-chapped, and your spirit is oddly restored. Because for all the discomfort, the sand, and the truly baffling approach to swimwear, there is nothing quite like the Victorian seaside for making you appreciate the simple joy of fresh air, frozen extremities, and the knowledge that, at least for tonight, you won't have to ride home in a bathing machine pulled by a horse named Reginald. And that, in the world of Victorian fun, counts as a resounding victory. After dinner, you are trapped in a parlour with 15 distant cousins and only your wits to protect you. Victorian parlour games are less entertainment and more an elaborate way to destroy reputations, challenge friendships, and test how far a person can stretch the definition of fun. It's the golden hour, candles flicker. The furniture has been pushed aside, and someone's aunt is already knitting her brows in anticipation of the coming carnage. There is no escape. Your fate is sealed by the social contract and the geography of wingback chairs. You perch on an ottoman, scanning the room for an exit, but you know in your bones, no one leaves until at least 3 people have been mortally embarrassed, and one family secret has been exposed. The master of ceremonies, almost always a middle-aged man with dangerous twinkle in his eye, stands to announce the first game, charades. Not modern charades, mind you, but the Victorian version, which is a cross between performance art, competitive poetry, and emotional warfare. You're handed a slip of paper that reads, "Hamlet's second cousin once removed," and are expected to convey this using nothing but frantic hand gestures, interpretive grunting, and the hope that your relatives are psychic. Your team shouts increasingly desperate guesses. A chicken? Smallpox? The Crimean War? You flop about for 3 minutes before collapsing into a nearby settee, sweating through your cravat. The answer is revealed, and everyone laughs, some kindly, others with the chilling satisfaction of social predators. But the games have only just begun. Next comes Consequences, a sort of proto-reality show where everyone writes names, places, actions, and outcomes on scraps of paper, folds them, and passes them around to be assembled into a story. The resulting narrative inevitably features the vicar eloping with the local barmaid, or Lady Hortense being discovered in the pantry with a jam tart and an alarming lack of trousers. Laughter fills the room. But make no mistake, reputations are being quietly recalibrated. The more inventive your scandal, the higher your social stock. Unless, of course, the wrong person takes offence, in which case you are shunned at tea for a fortnight. Then comes the minister's cat, a game that sounds harmless but is actually a memory gauntlet disguised as a vocabulary lesson. Each player must describe the minister's cat with an adjective starting with the next letter of the alphabet. The minister's cat is an amiable cat, a bouncing cat, a cantankerous cat. One mistake, and the entire room pounces. The pressure is immense. The stakes, if you are under the age of 12, feel life-altering. Let us not forget the classic forfeits. In this game, items are confiscated. Your glove, your handkerchief, your dignity, and returned only after you complete a forfeit imposed by a gleeful crowd. These tasks range from the mildly humiliating, recite a poem while standing on one foot, to the outright life-altering, declare your secret crush on someone in the room. There is no winning, only degrees of survival. Throughout, the atmosphere is a strange mix of cutthroat and cordial. Victorian politeness demands you smile through the sting of mockery, and retaliation is both expected and meticulously planned. The laughter is genuine, but so is the tension. You learn to read the subtle signals, the arch of an eyebrow, the twitch of a fan, the ominous clearing of a throat before a particularly vicious round of 20 questions. At last, the clock strikes a merciful hour. Someone's grandfather claims fatigue, signaling the end. You stagger from the parlor, exhausted, victorious, and possibly one reputation poorer. And yet, as you lie in bed, replaying your worst charade in your mind, you can't help but admit, Victorian parlor games are the ultimate test of character. If you can survive social death in the drawing room, you can survive anything the century throws at you. Besides, you'll get another chance to win back your dignity at next week's gathering, assuming you're invited back. The evening air is thick with the scent of paper and suppressed opinions. Welcome to the reading circle, where you must pretend to enjoy a novel, passively aggressively critique each other's tastes, and feign interest as Mr. Bunting reads the entire preface out loud for reasons known only to Mr. Bunting. You've just settled into a creaking chair, cradling a cup of tepid tea, surrounded by the literary elite of your neighborhood, by which we mean your most verbose neighbors and the occasional aunt who's here for the biscuits. It's 1892, and you, a reluctant intellectual, are armed with a borrowed copy of The Mystery of Hedgehog Manor. Your bookmark, artfully placed in Chapter 2, is meant to suggest you're farther along than you actually are. Everyone else seems to have finished the novel. Everyone else is lying. The rules of reading circles are unwritten but brutally enforced. First, never reveal how little you've actually read. Second, always have an opinion, even if it's about the book's font. Third, agree with Mrs. Fenwick at least once, or she'll mention your scandalous overuse of exclamation points in correspondence. Tonight's novel is ambitious, challenging, and not for everyone, which are all polite code for dull as ditch water, and nobody knows what happened after Chapter 4. As the meeting begins, Mr. Bunting, self-appointed moderator and destroyer of attention spans, stands to deliver a dramatic reading of the preface. He enunciates every comma as if it were a spiritual revelation. The group endures this with a mixture of forced serenity and silent prayer for divine intervention. Your mind wanders. How many biscuits would be too many? Is it possible to fall asleep with your eyes open? Would anyone notice if you swapped your tea for gin? When it's finally over, discussion begins, slowly at first, like a train stuck in literary fog. Mrs. Fenwick is first to speak, having prepared a 10-minute monologue on the moral ambiguity of the protagonist's hedgehog. Others chime in with well-practiced insights, most of which are recycled from last month's book, or possibly from a particularly moving sermon about honesty. The air hums with "yes, I quite agree," and, well, in my view, and isn't it fascinating how the author uses weather as a metaphor for emotional repression? It's always raining in Victorian novels because it's always raining in Victorian England. The true entertainment, of course, lies not in the plot but in the social chess unfolding between the lines. Watch as Mrs. Fenwick and Miss Armitage fence, with thinly veiled jabs, over the meaning of a minor character's umbrella. Observe the way Mr. Bunting nods solemnly at every point, all the while plotting his own lengthy treatise on Victorian punctuation. In the far corner, young Emily stifles a yawn with her copy of the book, while secretly composing poetry about the futility of existence, or possibly just the futility of this evening. The snacks, at least, offer some relief. Biscuits and tea are passed with the solemnity of a religious ritual. You time your comments to coincide with the passing of the tray, hoping to secure an extra shortbread without drawing the ire of Mrs. Fenwick, who is rumoured to count the number of custard creams each attendee consumes. Eventually, conversation veers dangerously close to real emotion. Someone confesses they didn't care for the book's ending. Shock ripples through the room. Mr. Bunting shifts in his chair. Mrs. Fenwick's teacup pauses mid-air. The spell is broken only by the suggestion to vote on next month's novel. Something lighter, perhaps, or at least shorter than a tax manual. As the evening draws to a close, you offer parting words, something vague but supportive, and slink homeward, stomach full of biscuits and head swirling with literary half-truths. Because in the Victorian reading circle, the greatest fiction is often what's left unsaid. And the real story is always about the people, not the pages. Tonight, you're cast as footman number 2 in a 5-hour adaptation of Macbeth, performed in a freezing drawing room. Forget the West End. This is theatre where everyone forgets their lines. Someone faints in the second act, and the curtain is just a blanket nailed to the wall. Your evening begins with the fluttering nerves of an opening night, except the only audience is your own family, the local vicar, and 3 neighbours who only showed up for the promise of ginger biscuits at intermission. You clutch your dog-eared script, which is already missing pages 14 and 27, the cat made off with them last Tuesday, and try to recall the single line you have in Act 3, something about horses, or possibly cheese. The Parlor, transformed by sheer force of imagination into the Scottish Highlands, is freezing. This is partly due to Victorian heating technology, and partly because every window has been flung open for ventilation. The effect is more Siberian prison than Cawdor Castle. Set design is limited to whatever could be scavenged from the attic. Tonight's witches circle a bubbling cauldron that, up close, is clearly Aunt Margaret's soup pot filled with steaming socks for atmosphere. The audience, bundled in shawls, murmurs with anticipation or hypothermia. Backstage, if it can be called that, is a corridor crowded with cousins in makeshift togas, Lady Macbeth powdering her nose with flour, and the lead actor frantically searching for his lost moustache. The tension is palpable. Last week's dress rehearsal ended in disaster when Mrs. Featherstone's wig caught fire during the Banquo's ghost scene. The vicar has been praying for a less combustible performance. At last, the show begins. The opening lines are delivered with the hushed urgency of people who know the entire village will be gossiping about this for weeks. Dialogue ricochets around the room, landing with unpredictable force. Lord Macbeth, who is also the postmaster, delivers his soliloquy directly to the hat stand, which is the most attentive member of the audience. Lady Macbeth, never one for subtlety, dials her performance up to 11, alarming the housemaid who mistakes her wailing for a genuine medical emergency. You, footman number 2, enter stage left, which is actually just the doorway to the conservatory. Trying not to trip on the hem of your borrowed dressing gown, your line is met with a mixture of polite applause and confused stares. No one is entirely sure if you're in the right scene. But the beauty of Victorian amateur theatre is that nobody cares. Missed cues are met with heroic improvisation. Is this a dagger which I see before me? Or is it just Mrs. Bartholomew's knitting needle again? The audience's attention drifts in and out. Small children fall asleep on their mothers' laps. Elderly guests snore gently, occasionally startled awake by enthusiastic sword fighting performed with fireplace pokers. The intermission is called not because the play requires it, but because Mrs. Dunsworthy has threatened to faint if she isn't served tea and cake. The final act arrives, dragging itself toward a conclusion like a wounded stag. Lady Macbeth, exhausted and flour-covered, delivers her last lines with the tragic energy of someone who's just realized she forgot to turn off the stove at home. The murder scenes are conducted with decorum, that is to say, lots of dramatic groaning and absolutely no actual blood. Red scarves will do. The curtain call is a triumph, if only because everyone survived. As you take your bow, the room erupts in applause, relief, and the sound of chairs being rearranged for supper. You're footman number 2, yes, but for one night. You are also a star in the Victorian constellation of community theatre. And that, truly, is the magic of the amateur dramatic. A little chaos, a lot of heart, and the shared certainty that next year's show will be even more legendary. You gather around a wobbly table while someone's aunt channels the spirit of a fishmonger named Reginald. Seances are all the rage, part entertainment, part mild con, all the excuse you need to scream when the lights go out or someone brushes your ankle under the table. It's a Thursday evening in 1891, and your hostess, Mrs. Netherwhistle, has dimmed the gas lamps and draped her drawing room in every lace curtain she owns. A velvet tablecloth clings to a circular table that hasn't been level since the Crimean War. Guests arrive bearing offerings, candles, suspicious enthusiasm, and a cake shaped like a crystal ball. You are ushered in with great ceremony and reminded to silence your thoughts, which is difficult because your thoughts are mostly about whether that cake is edible. The room smells faintly of beeswax, mothballs, and tension. Aunt Dorothea, self-declared medium and enthusiastic amateur dramatist, adjusts her turban, crafted from a curtain tieback, and gazes solemnly at the flickering candlelight. Everyone holds hands, some reluctantly, some with slightly sweaty palms. You find yourself locked between cousin Letitia, who has never once stopped humming, and Mr. Pelham, a man whose hands are suspiciously clammy for someone supposedly alive. Spirits, intones Aunt Dorothea. We seek your wisdom. The table creaks ominously, possibly in response, possibly because it's 3 legs and 1 teacup. The air is thick with expectation and pipe smoke. Someone coughs, someone else giggles. You suppress a sneeze and pray the ghosts don't take offense. Aunt Dorothea begins to sway, eyelids fluttering. She announces the presence of Reginald, a deceased fishmonger who wishes to speak. Reginald apparently died under mysterious circumstances involving a crate of oysters and a misunderstanding about eels. She adopts a voice that can only be described as nautical baritone and tells you to beware the number 7, creaky floorboards, and pickled onions. Mr. Pelham gasps. He had pickled onions with lunch. This is enough to convince half the room that the veil between worlds has indeed been parted. Mrs. Netherwhistle begins to sob into a monogrammed handkerchief. A breeze rustles the curtains. The table shifts. Everyone goes very quiet, except Letitia, who hums louder. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Young Edwin attempts to peek beneath the table and gets smacked by an unseen hand, or possibly the family dog. A soft thump sounds from the corner. Aunt Dorothea announces that a second spirit is entering. This one is named Mildred, and she's cranky. Mildred allegedly wants everyone to know that the afterlife is very drafty, and that someone needs to check the boiler. Then the candle blows out. Chaos ensues. Someone screams, someone else faints. Mr. Pelham drops the teacup he was clutching for moral support. You are fairly certain your foot was just touched by something cold and damp. Possibly the dog, possibly Reginald, possibly your own imagination, which has been running laps since the séance began. Eventually, a match is struck. Light returns. Aunt Dorothea is slumped in her chair, either communing with spirits or taking a quick nap. The guests are pale, wide-eyed, and mildly exhilarated. Mrs. Netherwhistle declares the evening a triumph and offers brandy, which everyone accepts immediately, especially Mr. Pelham. As the evening winds down, theories abound. Was the table truly levitating, or did someone's knee slip? Was Reginald real, or a figment of Aunt Dorothea's literary ambitions? Was Mildred the spirit world's version of a disgruntled neighbour, or simply a metaphor for poor insulation? It doesn't matter. The séance did exactly what it was meant to do: provide excitement, catharsis, and a decent excuse to hold hands with your crush while pretending to be terrified. You leave with the unsettling feeling that something beyond your comprehension has occurred, or that someone under the table just needed more legroom. Either way, you'll never look at a fishmonger or a table leg the same way again. Victorians believed in facing joy and tragedy with the same expression: mild constipation. Social gatherings were an exercise in never revealing your true feelings. Smiling was optional, open laughter was suspicious, and any display of genuine happiness could clear a room. You find yourself in a drawing room that smells faintly of lavender, beeswax, and quiet desperation. It's 1887, and the height of fashion is not your gown or your cravat, but your ability to maintain an absolutely neutral face in the midst of utter chaos. The rules are simple. Never frown, never grin, never betray the fact that you just stepped in the soup tureen, or that the dog is enthusiastically eating someone's bonnet. Stiff upper lips are not so much a social grace as a competitive sport. Think of it as emotional poker night. But everyone is playing with their life savings. The evening proceeds with the usual parade of social landmines. Mr. Godfrey recounts a story about the Crimean War that becomes steadily more gruesome, yet you nod along, eyes glazed, mouth unmoving, as if he's discussing the weather. Mrs. Portis drops a plate of seed cake with the force of a small landslide. No one flinches. Not a single eyebrow is raised. You make a mental note to retrieve the larger pieces before the dog claims them, all while maintaining an expression that suggests you're silently reciting Latin verbs. It's not just parties where repression reigns supreme. Weddings, funerals, christenings, all are treated with the same solemnity. At a funeral, tears are permissible only if shed with such subtlety that your handkerchief remains dry. At a wedding, you may permit yourself a brief smile, provided it doesn't last longer than the closing hymn. If someone gets engaged, the correct response is a firm handshake and a murmured, "How efficient." If someone's child wins a prize for penmanship, you may allow a fleeting glimmer of pride to pass through your pupils, but only when no one is looking. The ultimate test comes with good news and bad. The birth of a child? Oh, how very satisfactory. The sudden loss of a fortune to a rogue stockbroker? Well, these things do happen. Your house burns down? It's rather bracing, isn't it? The trick is never to appear too invested in the outcome of anything. To be seen caring is to be seen vulnerable. And vulnerability is the cardinal sin in the cathedral of Victorian etiquette. The effects of such relentless emotional discipline are everywhere. Couples court for years without exchanging so much as a meaningful glance. Letters home from soldiers are masterclasses in understatement. Lost half a leg, but spirits remain undampened. Even laughter, when it happens, is filtered through a handkerchief and ends quickly, like a guilty sneeze. The sound of genuine joy is as rare as a working umbrella. Of course, this culture of repression has its loopholes. The English garden, for example, is where you may weep quietly into a rhododendron bush, or express delight by deadheading a rose with extra vigor. Music rooms are notorious for secret emotional outbursts. Catch someone sobbing at the pianoforte, and everyone agrees it's just the Chopin. And every so often, In the privacy of the scullery, the cook will cackle like a banshee, releasing enough emotional pressure to keep the entire household upright for another week. But in public, the mask is sacred. Children are praised for their stoic silences, dogs are scolded for wagging their tails too enthusiastically, and the only creature allowed genuine enthusiasm is the family horse, who cannot be blamed for his lack of human self-control. At the end of the night, you go home proud, exhausted, and not entirely sure what anyone actually felt about anything. You survived another round of emotional gladiators, emerging with your dignity and your upper lip intact. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, because in Victorian England, the greatest adventure of all is the perilous journey through your own unexpressed feelings. It's the weekend, so naturally, you're off to pay money to gawk at people with interesting beards, flexible limbs, or accents from Wales. For a shilling, you can marvel at the world's tallest man, the tiniest woman, and question your own moral compass before tea time. Victorian entertainment is not for the faint of heart, or for those with a strong sense of dignity. At the edge of every bustling city, nestled between the puppet theatre and the sausage cart, you'll find a gaudy tent or creaking wooden hall adorned with banners announcing the amazing elastic boy or the bearded lady. Marvel of modern science. You hand your coin to a barker in a too-small waistcoat, his moustache waxed into sharp little points, and are swept inside with a crowd of children, servants, and society ladies disguised in veils to avoid recognition. The air is thick with the smell of popcorn, sawdust, and curiosity, an intoxicating mix that signals you're about to see something you'll never forget, and possibly regret. The show begins with a flourish. A man in a top hat proclaims that you, the audience, are privileged to witness wonders from the farthest reaches of the empire and the darkest corners of the human gene pool. The exhibits are introduced one by one, a woman with a beard more lustrous than any on Fleet Street, a pair of twins joined at the hip and making the best of it with a slapstick routine, a living skeleton who tips his hat and hopes nobody sneezes too hard in his direction. Victorian morality exists in a kind of quantum state inside these shows. You're meant to gasp, applaud, and murmur politely about the marvels of nature, all while suppressing any overt displays of discomfort. It's a collision of horror, awe, and a peculiar breed of scientific interest that allows respectable people to stare openly at others for the first time in their lives. The audience is encouraged to ask questions about height, weight, how many eggs the strongest man can consume in a single sitting, while the barker weaves tales of mystery and romance, most of them invented on the spot. Children love the spectacle, and so do adults, though the latter pretend they're here for educational purposes. Some bring notebooks and sketch the acts, all while muttering about phrenology and the latest theories from the Lancet. Meanwhile, in the back, a few quietly slip coins to performers who pose for private photographs, knowing these images will be passed around parlors and smoking rooms for weeks to come. Of course, the real drama isn't always on stage. Whispered gossip flies. Are the Siamese twins really related? Or is it just clever tailoring? Is the 2-foot-tall woman actually a child in disguise? Did the tattooed man really spend time with cannibals? Or did he just get bored on a long sea voyage with a bottle of ink? Every oddity comes with its own scandal, and audiences eat it up with the same vigor as their caramel apples. Between acts, you mill about, perhaps buying a lock of the bearded lady's hair. A popular souvenir, though suspiciously identical to the wool from the strongest man's socks. Tea is served in chipped cups, and the atmosphere is equal parts carnival, science fair, and awkward family reunion. As the show ends, the barker bows, thanks you for your patronage, and invites you to return next week for something even more astounding. You step back into the daylight, adjusting your hat, clutching your questionable souvenirs, and feeling the strange mix of fascination, discomfort, and self-reflection that only a Victorian freak show can deliver. Because in this era, Entertainment isn't just about fun. It's about staring at the strange and, just for a moment, being grateful that you get to leave the tent at all. The Victorian tea party was less about refreshment and more about social combat. Here, every pour of the teapot is a performance, every cake is a status symbol, and one wrong opinion about scones can ignite a passive-aggressive feud that lasts generations. You receive your invitation printed on thick, perfumed cardstock, a clear sign the hostess means business. At precisely 4 o'clock, you don your best gloves and arrive at a drawing room that smells faintly of roses, anxiety, and impending judgment. Delicate china clinks on polished wood. Napkins are starched to the tensile strength of sheet metal, and a mountain of baked goods glistens temptingly at the center of the table. The hostess, Mrs. Blenkinsop, reigns over the proceedings with the steely poise of a seasoned general, her only weapon, a silver teapot, and an encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhood scandals. The opening ceremony is the pouring of the tea, a task fraught with peril. To pour first is an honor and a risk. Too weak, and you'll be whispered about for weeks. Too strong, and someone's mother-in-law will accidentally overturn a cup in protest. Milk goes in before tea, or after. This is a question that has ended friendships, divided families, and inspired more than one passive-aggressive pamphlet. You select your cup with the solemnity of a knight choosing a sword. You accept the sugar tongs, never the spoon, that's for savages, and stir exactly 3 times in a clockwise direction. 4 is ostentatious, 2 is rude. Next comes the real battlefield, the cakes and biscuits. Victoria sponge, Battenberg, Eccles cakes, shortbread so brittle it's rumoured to shatter glass. The array is both a culinary marvel and a gauntlet. You must take one of everything, but not too quickly, lest you appear greedy, not too slowly, or you risk looking disdainful. Then there are the scones, a deceptively innocent pastry that conceals the greatest threat to peace. The debate over cream or jam first, Cornwall or Devon. Say the wrong thing and you'll be shunned, quietly but completely, until your grandchildren graduate from university. Conversations swirl as freely as the cream. There's the latest on Lady Chudley's mysterious new companion. Surely not a relative. Have you seen the hats? Whispered speculation about Mr. Godfrey's bankruptcy and an ongoing saga involving Mrs. Jeffrey's questionable sherry trifle. Everyone is all smiles and syrupy politeness. But every compliment is booby-trapped. What a lovely dress, Mrs. Swan. So brave to wear velvet in June. Your lemon drizzle is quite unique. Did you use vinegar? Tea parties are also where alliances are forged and broken. Mrs. Blenkinsop maintains her power not through brute force, but through the careful redistribution of invitations, sly remarks, and knowing looks. Seating is a game of strategy. Place the 2 gossipers at opposite ends, keep the spinster aunts away from the sugar, and never let Mrs. Pritchard near the clotted cream, not after last year's incident. As the evening stretches on, small slights accumulate like crumbs on the carpet. Mrs. Potts, having received her tea last, mutters about modern manners. Someone's child is reprimanded for double-dipping a finger into the lemon curd. The vicar, sensing a moral emergency, changes the subject to the weather, at which point the entire party breaks into a frenzied discussion of last Thursday's rain, as if it were a historic event. The tension never fully dissipates, only simmers, waiting for the next tea party to boil over. Eventually, you make your exit, head high, crumbs artfully brushed away. Alliance is intact, for now. You leave behind a battlefield disguised as a drawing room, confident that you survived another round in the endless war of manners and marzipan. Because in Victorian England, tea was never just tea, it was the most civilized form of combat ever invented. Tonight, You cram into a smoke-filled music hall for questionable jokes, daring songs, and the thrilling possibility that someone's ankle might be exposed on stage. It's loud, chaotic, and possibly the most fun you'll have all year, until the police arrive to enforce decency. It's Saturday night, and the street outside is buzzing with anticipation. You squeeze through the crowd and past a doorman who looks like he eats hecklers for breakfast. Inside, the hall is a riot of sound, colour, and a faint but ever-present aroma of spilled ale, cheap perfume, and hope. You wedge yourself onto a bench that's seen better centuries, surrounded by clerks, shopgirls, dock workers, and the occasional respectable lady in disguise, which means she's swapped her hat for an even bigger hat. The lights dim, which mostly means someone throws a cloth over the gas lamps, and the band strikes up, led by a pianist who is either a genius or simply paid by the note. The MC bounds on stage, cracking jokes that walk the perilous line between delightfully risque and summon the constable. Laughter rolls through the audience, punctuated by wolf whistles, groans, and the distant sound of a glass breaking. Then come the acts, one after another, with barely enough time to gasp between. There's a comic duo, Billy and Ted, who trade puns about pickpockets and mother-in-laws, both deeply relatable topics. Next, a singer with a voice strong enough to rattle the light fittings belts out a ballad about lost love and cheap gin, before tossing in a wink so suggestive half the audience drops its monocle. Dancers twirl onto the stage, skirts flying just high enough to scandalize the pious and delight everyone else. The bravest among them dares to flash a shapely ankle. There is applause, there is swooning. There is one elderly gentleman in the front row fanning himself with the playbill, just in case. Between performances, the crowd is rowdy but good-natured, mostly. Wagers are placed on the next act. Cider is spilled on at least 2 people per minute, and the house regulars lead a sing-along of Champagne Charlie that echoes out into the street. The wit is quick, the spirits are quicker, and every single soul in the room is convinced that, for tonight, they are part of something special, something almost subversive, but the shadow of respectability always looms. The owner, nervous about the ever-watchful eyes of the morality police, keeps a close watch for any hint of indecency. A whisper goes up. "The inspector's in tonight." Instantly, necklines are raised, lyrics become slightly more wholesome, and one comedian launches into a hasty tribute to Queen Victoria, delivered with the sort of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax returns. Of course, not every attempt at decency is successful. A song about a wayward barmaid nearly brings down the house, both figuratively and literally, as the crowd pounds the tables in delight, and a nearby chandelier swings with a menacing creak. The acts grow wilder as the evening wears on. A juggler drops his clubs, a magician makes a ham sandwich disappear, and a ventriloquist gets so drunk he forgets which puppet is supposed to be talking. Eventually, the hall is thick with laughter, secrets, and enough tobacco smoke to asphyxiate a moderately sized goat. Just as a particularly daring number is about to begin, one rumoured to feature a suggestive umbrella, the doors burst open, and 2 policemen stride in, faces set to disapprove. The show grinds to a halt. The crowd groans. The dancers scuttle backstage like startled cats. The constables make a show of restoring order, issuing warnings about public morality, then quietly slip out, possibly humming the chorus to Daisy Bell. As you spill into the street, voice hoarse from singing and eyes stinging from smoke, you know you've witnessed true Victorian entertainment, rowdy, raucous, and teetering on the brink of chaos. And you'll be back next week, hoping for one more glimpse of forbidden laughter, and maybe, just maybe, an encore of that scandalous ankle. Victorian pubs are equal parts camaraderie and chaos. You'll witness spontaneous singing, heated debates about the corn laws, and at least one bar fight over a game of dominoes. If you survive the night, you'll go home smelling like victory, or failing that, pickled onions. It's Thursday, which means it's time to escape the cold, grey world of Victorian respectability and dive headlong into the warm, sticky embrace of the local pub. As you step through the wooden doors, you're greeted by a wall of sound and smells. Roasting meat, spilled ale, cheap tobacco, and the peculiar tang of old boots drying by the fire. The atmosphere is electric, a collision of laughter, shouted greetings, and the distinct crack of billiard balls colliding somewhere in the back. You claim a rickety stool at the bar, wedging yourself between a retired prizefighter and a poet who insists on reciting verses about turnips between sips of gin. The bartender, an oracle in an apron, pours you a pint with a practiced hand, never missing a beat as he diffuses a brewing argument over who last bought a round. The price of ale is steady, the conversation anything but. Soon, the games begin. Darts are thrown with the kind of reckless abandon usually reserved for political assassinations. Every miss is met with a cheer, every bullseye with a collective gasp, followed by someone declaring, "Pure luck." Dominoes clatter across battered tables, drawing in crowds of experts and armchair strategists. There are disputes, there are accusations of cheating, and there are always more rules than anyone can remember. The losers are expected to buy the next round, or, in some cases, recite a poem in their worst Welsh accent. As the evening wears on, the pub becomes a theatre of human folly. In one corner, a group belts out a bawdy tune, encouraging even the most reserved patron to join in. If you can carry a tune, you're met with applause. If not, no one minds. Volume matters more than melody. In the back, the landlord's dog makes the rounds, hoovering up dropped chips and accepting gentle pats from children who should, by rights, have been in bed hours ago. The atmosphere is democratic. No one cares about your title, your income, or whether your socks match. Tonight, everyone is united by the simple joys of drink, noise, and a mutual disregard for tomorrow's responsibilities. Of course, tempers flare. A debate over the merits of Queen Victoria's latest railway scheme escalates until someone slams a fist on the table, sloshing ale everywhere. But before things can get too heated, the crowd erupts in laughter, and the nearest bystander diffuses the tension with an impromptu toast to peace and to not getting arrested. Again, there are always stories of last week's brawl or the infamous night when old Tom tried to ride the pub's pig home after a wager gone wrong. As midnight nears, the pace slows. Bread, cheese, and pickled onions are passed around as a kind of edible truce. Someone starts a final chorus of "John Barleycorn Must Die," and even the grumpiest regular joins in, voice hoarse but spirits high. You stagger out at closing time, jacket smeared with mystery gravy, pockets lighter, heart inexplicably fuller, and as you walk home beneath the smoky glow of gas lamps, you realize you've survived another Victorian pub night. You might not remember every detail in the morning, but you'll know you were part of something raucous, ridiculous, and entirely essential. A small rebellion against the stiff upper lip, waged with laughter, ale, and a dangerously sharp dart. Gather round for the latest in cardboard-based entertainment. Victorian board games were designed to teach children about morality, fate, and the crushing inevitability of failure. One unlucky roll and you're right back where you started, pondering your place in the universe. The parlor is set. By gaslight, you and your fellow players sit cross-legged on a faded rug. The centerpiece of the evening. A brand new board game, Snakes and Ladders, fresh from the shop, promising moral enlightenment and a rare opportunity for children to defeat adults without anyone being sent to the workhouse. The air crackles with anticipation, or possibly with static from woolen socks. These games aren't the fast-paced affairs of modern life. No, each round is a gentle odyssey through the Victorian psyche. Take your turn with reverence, roll a bone dice, move your wooden marker, and hope that Providence, or at least the spirit of Queen Victoria, smiles upon you. The rules are simple, and so are the stakes. A journey from the bottom of the board to the top, via a series of ladders representing virtue, diligence, and remembering to say your prayers, and snakes representing sloth, pride, and failing to respect one's elders. Progress is never guaranteed. You scramble ahead, buoyed by a lucky roll, only to tumble down a serpent for cheating at lessons or forgetting your Latin verbs. In Victorian logic, every setback is a teaching moment, and every victory a test of humility. Parents lean in to moralize, whispering, "That's what happens to those who covet jam tarts." As your marker slides from square 98 to square 6, the game is as much about developing character as winning, a sort of cardboard boot camp for the soul. It's not just snakes and ladders. Game cupboards across the empire are filled with similar gems. The game of human life, where you learn that becoming a bankrupt is only 2 bad rolls away. The mansion of happiness, which promises eternal bliss for those who reach the last square without being sent to the house of correction for playing on Sundays. There are word games, spelling bees, and spelling boards, each one an exercise in discipline and existential dread. You might escape the snakes, but you will never escape the lessons. As the evening unfolds, emotions run high. Siblings accuse one another of suspicious rolling. A distant cousin throws a mild tantrum after sliding down 3 snakes in a row, claiming the board is cursed and vowing to become a sailor. Meanwhile, grandmother dispenses cryptic advice about the game of life while knitting at twice the speed of sound. Someone's pet ferret runs off with a dice, and the whole game pauses while everyone searches under the chaise lounge, reflecting on fate, mortality, and why these games never seem to end. But the real existential dread comes near the finish line. You're 1 roll away from glory when, disaster, you hit the longest snake and slide back to square 1. The embodiment of Victorian stoicism in the face of adversity. Everyone else groans in sympathy, but secretly, they're delighted to see you taken down a peg. After all, board games are Victorian society in miniature. The climb is long, the fall is sudden, and sometimes virtue is just a lucky break with the dice. At last, someone stumbles into victory. Usually the youngest child, who is rewarded with an extra slice of seed cake and a rousing speech on the dangers of pride. The rest of you pack up the board, wondering what it all meant, and whether any game can truly prepare you for the random snakes of daily life. Because in Victorian England, fun isn't just about winning, it's about learning to lose spectacularly, in the most character-building way possible. You acquire a penny farthing and immediately regret it. Victorian cycling is a mixture of bravery, stupidity, and the hope that your hatpin will protect you from disaster. Every ride is a battle with cobblestones, mud, and gravity, but at least you look dashing in your bloomers. It's the 1880s and the streets are alive with the metallic rattle of progress. The ordinary bicycle, as the penny farthing is optimistically called, is the height of fashionable transportation and peril. The wheelbase alone is taller than a grown man. Mounting it requires the flexibility of a circus performer and the faith of a tightrope walker. Step 1. Place 1 foot on a tiny rear peg. Step 2. Launch yourself skyward while praying that today, of all days, your trousers won't betray you. As you wobble into motion, you're propelled by a heady mix of wind, adrenaline, and the awareness that your life is now in the hands of basic physics and Victorian road design. The roads are not forgiving. Cobblestones jut from the earth like the teeth of some ancient beast, each one waiting to unseat you. Mud puddles appear without warning, and the occasional wayward chicken, dog, or child adds a degree of difficulty best described as fatal. But what style? Whether you're a gentleman in tweeds or a daring lady in rational dress, you ride in the face of danger with a smile and a secret will. Cycling clubs bloom across the country, filling the streets with cheerful processions of mustaches, ribbons, and hopeful optimism. There are races, time trials, and the ever-popular who can make it to the baker's shop and back without a single dismount challenge, a feat yet to be achieved by anyone with a sense of self-preservation. Let's not ignore the social implications. The penny farthing is an instant status symbol. Arriving at a picnic atop your gleaming velocipede marks you as a person of means, confidence, and possibly a questionable relationship with your own mortality. For women, it's nothing short of revolutionary. Bloomers, those controversial billowy trousers, offer mobility and scandal in equal measure. Grandmothers faint. Young men swoon. The local constable pretends not to notice. But everyone's aware. You, dear rider, are at the cutting edge of fashion and feminist defiance. Of course, the price of admission is paid in bruises. Every cyclist bears scars, both physical and emotional. The term header is coined for the inevitable moment you fly over the handlebars and land, face first, in the nearest rosebush. Medical manuals offer conflicting advice. Some recommend stout boots and a hat pin for protection. Others suggest writing your will in advance. Padded clothing is fashionable not for looks, but for the cushion it provides when colliding with a low wall or an inattentive milkman. Yet the risks are part of the fun. With every successful journey, you earn bragging rights and a place in cycling folklore. Stories abound of misses. Pembroke completing a 5-mile circuit with only minor blood loss, or young Harold Dodd winning the village race after a squirrel sabotaged the favourite by darting beneath his front wheel. Pubs echo with tales of impossible speeds, daring descents, and miraculous escapes from certain death. As the sun sets, you wheel your penny farthing home, slower, a bit wiser, and possibly limping. You're battered, mud-splattered, and triumphant. Cycling in Victorian England isn't just a sport. It's a declaration that you will not be cowed by gravity, nor by public opinion, nor even by your own common sense, because in this era, fun comes with danger, and the best adventures are survived by those who look dashing in the process. It's a sunny afternoon, and you are forced outdoors for mingling, awkward conversation, and watching Lady Prunella's prize roses grow at a rate just fast enough to avoid conversation with Colonel Wadsworth. Victorian garden parties are not so much about enjoying nature as they are about enduring it with style. You step onto a manicured lawn hemmed by box hedges, your shoes already sinking into the turf. A gentle reminder that practical footwear is for the lower classes. Above you, the sky is blue, but your optimism is as fragile as the bone china teacup you're handed by a footman in starched gloves. The air is heavy with the scent of lilies, cut grass, and that underlying anxiety that comes from knowing you'll be judged by your ability to balance a plate of cake and your opinions about peonies. Lady Prunella, hostess and garden dictator, sweeps past in a dress the size of a modest gazebo, issuing instructions to the gardener and warnings to guests who dare step too close to her delphiniums. The main attractions are her roses, which are displayed with all the fanfare of crown jewels and guarded by a peacock who has absolutely no patience for children, hats, or the vicar's cane. The games begin almost immediately. Croquet, with its elegant mallets and bewildering rules, is the main event. The object is simple. Hit your ball through a series of hoops, without accidentally launching it into the hydrangeas or decapitating a pansy. Tensions run high as Mrs. Chudley attempts a bold stroke, misses, and strikes the butler's ankle instead. Apologies are exchanged, but only in the most clipped, non-committal Victorian way. "Oh, terribly sorry, I do hope you're not bleeding." Meanwhile, a brass quartet serenades the gathering from the far side of the lawn, valiantly competing with a squadron of bees, and the shrieks of children playing blind man's bluff. You try to engage in polite conversation about topiary with Colonel Wadsworth, but the only thing growing faster than the hedges is your desperation to escape. Pollen swirls in the air, tickling noses and testing the mettle of every guest. No one admits to having allergies, of course. Instead, discreet handkerchiefs appear, and eyes water stoically, the very picture of Victorian resolve. Refreshments circulate on trays. Cucumber sandwiches so thin they're practically theoretical. Sponge cakes with the density of small bricks, and lemonade so tart it could strip paint. The true test is eating gracefully, standing in a corset, while fending off wasps with a napkin and feigning interest in the intricacies of rose fertilization. Lady Prunella's prized peacock, meanwhile, makes a beeline for the cake table, scattering crumbs, shrieks, and at least one unsuspecting hat in its wake. Inevitably, there's the parade. Guests are expected to stroll around the garden, admiring the topiary and commenting on the weather in ways that suggest they've never seen either before. What a perfectly shaped boxwood, Lady Prunella. Remarkable sunshine for this time of year, don't you think? It's all code for I'd rather be inside with a cup of tea and fewer insects. As the afternoon wanes, guests gather for the awards. Best bonnet, most promising rosebud, and person least likely to ruin the lawn with muddy shoes. You congratulate the winners, nurse your sunburn, and sidestep the peacock on your way to the lemonade bowl. When the last polite applause fades and you're free to escape, you breathe in the sweet scent of freedom, along with enough pollen to keep you sneezing until Michaelmas. You survived another Victorian garden party, social warfare disguised as outdoor leisure with only minor injuries, a pocket full of crumbs, and a story that will last until next spring's invitations arrive. Victorian children at play, hoop rolling, marble, losing, and competitive skipping rope. Every toy is either a choking hazard or made of iron. And the concept of child safety is a rumor yet to reach the empire. It's late afternoon, and the garden is alive with shrieks, laughter, and the occasional cry that signals someone's made unfortunate contact with a blackberry bush. Victorian parents, believing that fresh air and physical exertion will build character, or at least tire the little monsters out before supper, release their children outdoors like a flock of over-sugared pigeons. There's no organized fun, just a bag of marbles, a hoop and stick, and the universal hope that nobody comes home with a concussion. Hoop rolling is the preferred activity, and it is exactly as high stakes as it sounds. Children chase iron hoops down cobblestone lanes, armed with sticks and questionable judgment. Points are awarded for speed, agility, and not accidentally steering into Mrs. Dunsworthy's prized azaleas. The real pros, usually the eldest boys with scabbed knees, can whip a hoop around corners and through impossibly tight spaces, leaving younger siblings trailing in a cloud of dust and resentment. Meanwhile, a parallel world of marbles unfolds on the garden path. Marbles are currency, social capital, and a choking hazard all rolled into one. Games are played with the solemnity of high-stakes poker. Knuckle down, shoot, and hope that Lady Luck, or at least the family cat, is on your side. Accusations of cheating abound. Tears are shed. Empires rise and fall on the outcome of a single shot. If you lose your best agate marble, Expect to write a heartfelt lament in your diary, and possibly to plot elaborate revenge. Skipping rope is the domain of the girls, mostly, though the bravest boys sometimes sneak in when they think no one's watching. The chants are rhythmic, the jumps are daring, and the rope itself is long enough to double as a tow line for small boats. Skinned knees are badges of honor, split petticoats are the cost of ambition. The local champion, Little Edith, can skip for 3 straight minutes without pausing for breath, attracting an audience of awestruck peers and at least one slightly worried governess. Not to be outdone, the toy cupboard offers delights such as lead soldiers, slingshots, spinning tops, and the infamous hobby horse, a wooden contraption that can be ridden, jousted with, or used in imaginative street battles of alarming ferocity. Dolls, too, have their place, though they are less adorable playthings and more memento mori in bonnets. Most are made from porcelain, and many sport the vacant stare of those who have seen unspeakable things. Of course, danger lurks behind every toy. Lead paint is the seasoning of choice for painted tin animals. Skipping ropes double as tripwires. Marbles are, inevitably, swallowed. Even the humble hoop has sent more than one child to bed with a shiner. The word safety is rarely spoken. Instead, children are told to be brave and walk it off. The only first aid is a brisk application of vinegar and a stern reminder that Queen Victoria would never cry over a skinned elbow. Despite the risks, or perhaps because of them, the joy is palpable. There are races through the orchard, secret forts built in hedges, and alliances forged and broken over lemonade. As dusk falls, children tumble indoors, hair tangled, cheeks glowing, pockets filled with treasures and dirt. Clothes are torn, shoes are lost, and tomorrow's adventures are already being planned. Because in the Victorian age, playtime isn't just about amusement, it's about testing the limits of physics, social order, and maternal patience. One nearly lethal toy at a time. You take a stroll along the promenade, which is code for ranking everyone's hat and noticing who is walking with whom. The real entertainment isn't in the scenery. It's in the silent, cutthroat world of social surveillance. Victorian promenades are society's most dignified battlegrounds, where the truly skilled flex their powers of observation under the guise of polite exercise. You button up your best coat, adjust your hat to a socially acceptable angle, and join the endless stream of humanity winding its way down a gravel path, lined with precisely trimmed hedges and the occasional disapproving swan. The goal is ostensibly fresh air and gentle movement. But everyone knows the real aim is to see and be seen. Each step is a delicate social dance. There's Lady Millbank, gliding arm in arm with her cousin, or so she claims, her ostrich-feathered bonnet bobbing like a ship in high seas. You clock the exact shade of her gloves, too daring for spring, surely, and make a mental note to mention this to Mrs. Truscott at tomorrow's reading circle. Behind you, the vicar and his wife walk precisely 2 paces apart, never touching, never speaking, yet somehow radiating the tension of a particularly competitive chess match. You try not to stare, too obviously. The children, theoretically here for wholesome recreation, are instead conducting a clandestine marble tournament in the shrubbery, under the distracted eyes of their nursemaids. On the far bench, old Mr. Green sits with his newspaper, though rumour has it he hasn't read a word in years. He's there to monitor canines, canes, and any romantic developments among the younger set. His judgments are swift, silent, and immortalized in his legendary eyebrow arch. You pace onward, perfecting your look of mild interest, eyes wandering but never lingering too long. The true masters of the promenade can assess an entire family's fortunes by the state of their boot polish. Is Miss Carter's hem muddy? Did young Mr. Beale get his cravat tied by a competent valet or his own incompetent hands? The clues are all there for the sharp-eyed, and in Victorian society, everyone's eyes are sharpened to a razor's edge. The highlight of the hour is the parade of hats. Some are feathered, some are flowered. A few defy both gravity and good taste. The unspoken contest. Whose headgear will be most discussed in the drawing rooms tonight? There are points for audacity, creativity, and sheer volume, but lose marks if your hat offends a horse, blocks sunlight for 3 paces, or, worst of all, resembles Mrs. Fenwick's from last week. A whispered scandal drifts your way. Colonel Blanchard seen promenading with Miss Violet, rather than his usual companion, his dog, Reginald. You pretend not to hear, but your ears are recording every detail for future deployment. Couples walking together are scrutinized, their relationships speculated upon, and every pause, glance, and giggle is fuel for next week's tea party. But the real art lies in being observed while observing. You must project just the right blend of decorum and curiosity, a person above gossip, and yet, miraculously, always in possession of the latest news. Too obvious, and you're branded a busybody. Too aloof, and you risk being labelled dull. The safest course? A knowing smile, a nod to acquaintances, and an occasional comment about the roses. As you turn for home, you realize the promenade is less a walk in the park than a masterclass in social maneuvering. You've dodged conversational landmines, catalogued hats, and emerged with new insights. And, if you're lucky, enough material to keep the drawing room buzzing for weeks. Because in the Victorian world, nothing is more entertaining or perilous than watching other people. While pretending you're only there for the fresh air, you are trapped in a smoke-filled parlor with a deck of cards and 6 people who are either cheating or have memorized the Encyclopedia Britannica. The stakes are low, but the drama is sky-high, especially if you dare to trump the vicar's ace. Card parties are the great equalizer of Victorian leisure, where the only things sharper than the corners of the playing cards are the wits and tongues of the assembled company. You arrive just after supper, stomach fortified with too much suet and too little wine, ready to enter a world where alliances shift as quickly as the smoke wafting from Mrs. Cartwright's cigarillo. The table is already set, green baize, stacks of coin, pennies, shillings, the odd button passed off as lucky, and the battered red box that holds the battered red cards. Tonight's game is whist, a beloved pastime that sits somewhere between a battle of intellects and a masterclass in passive aggression. Your fellow players are an eccentric gallery. Lady Finch, who swears she can read minds, and possibly does. Mr. Bellamy, whose moustache twitches suspiciously whenever he's about to pull a fast one. Miss Elspeth, who is so quiet you suspect she's been counting every played card since 1847. And the vicar, an unassuming titan whose only vice, it seems, is an unholy obsession with never losing a trick. The rules are simple, or so you're told. 4 players, 2 against 2, each vying for tricks in a sequence of battles where the right to lead can spark lifelong grudges. The others spectate, offer advice, and mutter dark predictions about following suit and throwing off. The game is less about luck and more about reading faces, bluffing, and deploying the occasional underhanded tactic. It's all in good fun, says Lady Finch, while expertly palming a spare queen. The tension builds with every deal. A misplaced card, a missed cue, and suddenly you're the pariah of the evening. Especially if you happen to renege on a contract or, heaven forbid, trump the vicar's ace with a flicker of glee. Conversation becomes weaponized. Well, I would never have played the 9-mai. What an interesting strategy. Of course, in my club, we always... Each round is a microcosm of Victorian society. Rigidly polite, savagely competitive, and endlessly ripe for gossip. Midway through the evening, tempers flare. Lady Finch accuses Mr. Bellamy of marking the backs of the cards with his fingernail pure habit, he protests. Miss Elspeth wins a hand so decisively that everyone wonders if she's a mathematical prodigy or simply clairvoyant. The vicar's composure is tested when his carefully laid plan is upended by a daring play from you, a lowly 7 snatching a trick from beneath his nose. The silence that follows is thick enough to slice. Refreshments are served, tepid tea, dry biscuits, and the occasional sherry for nerves. The conversation veers from gentle insults about technique to alarming confessions about the lengths some will go to in pursuit of victory. Someone recounts the tale of the great card scandal of 72, when a certain baroness allegedly hid extra cards in her sleeve, resulting in a family rift that lasted until the following Lent. As the evening draws to a close, scores are tallied, coins exchanged, and reputations quietly appraised. Winners are magnanimous, losers are philosophical, at least on the surface. Underneath, everyone is plotting for next week's rematch, vowing to study probability, or, at the very least, to switch out the cards for a less haunted set. You leave the smoky parlor slightly richer or poorer, mind buzzing, fingers tingling, and heart pounding with the thrill of near victory. Because in Victorian England, card parties are less about the cards and more about the games people play with each other. And whist, with its dark magic, its subtle betrayals, and its endless scope for scandal, is the most dangerous pastime of all. Sunday means standing in the rain, listening to brass bands play the same 3 songs until someone passes out, a dog escapes, or a small child is accidentally drafted into the percussion section. There is nothing quite like a Victorian brass band parade. You wake to the persistent drizzle of an English morning, and the faint, brassy strains of God Save the Queen drifting through your window. An omen that today, regardless of the weather or your personal wishes, you are going outside. After breakfast, and a lengthy debate about whether Wellington boots are socially appropriate, you march down to the green, umbrella in one hand and a sense of obligation in the other. The field is already crowded with townsfolk, bonnets drooping, and hats developing a slow, tragic tilt. The mayor beams from beneath a tarp, clapping politely as the band takes its position. 30 men in matching uniforms, each one clutching an instrument that could double as a weapon. The bandmaster raises his baton, and the parade begins. The music is both stirring and oddly repetitive. Rule Britannia, the British Grenadiers, and something suspiciously similar to Rule Britannia, played at a slightly different tempo. Within minutes, the field transforms into a muddy obstacle course. Boots slip, small children dart between legs, and at least one spaniel makes a break for freedom, pursued by a trombonist who, in a fit of overzealous marching, has dropped his sheet music in a puddle. The town nurse watches from the sidelines, well stocked with bandages and the grim knowledge that, statistically, at least 2 people will sprain an ankle before the end of the second march. The true joy of the parade isn't the music, which, by the 3rd repetition, begins to sound suspiciously like the band is marching in circles, but the spectacle. The tuba player, for example, is the size of a wardrobe and treats his instrument as both a musical device and a shield against the oncoming swarm of small, sticky-fingered admirers. The piccolo player, meanwhile, is a child prodigy with the self-importance of a Roman emperor, pausing between numbers to scowl at anyone not sufficiently impressed by his latest trill. Every so often, disaster strikes. A gust of wind lifts the bandmaster's hat, sending it sailing into the crowd, where it is immediately claimed by Mrs. Prendergast's terrier. The percussion section, comprised mainly of the less musically gifted children in town, launches into a cacophonous display, tambourines, triangles, and the occasional cowbell. One small child, bewildered but game, is handed a drumstick and told to just follow along. He does so with alarming enthusiasm, nearly knocking the clarinetist unconscious in the process. Despite the rain, despite the mud, despite the rising tension between the trumpet and the euphonium players, who are rumoured to be feuding over a disputed high C, the parade continues. The crowd applauds. Babies wail. The town photographer takes blurry pictures that will later be displayed with pride in the post office window. By the final number, Land of Hope and Glory, half the audience has retreated beneath the nearest tree, and the remaining brave souls cheer as the last note echoes into the drizzle. You return home soaked, windblown, and slightly deaf, trailing bits of wet grass and distant snatches of Sousa marches. Your shoes will never be the same, but your spirit is oddly buoyed, because in the Victorian era, a brass band parade is not just music, it's community, chaos, and proof that the show, like the rain, must always go on. You are provided with a sketch pad and a pencil and told to capture the majesty of a wilted fern. Victorian art clubs were less about talent and more about producing something you could later burn before anyone found out. It's Thursday evening, and the parlour is transformed into a makeshift atelier. Chairs are rearranged, a tea towel is draped over a mysterious stain on the carpet, and the still life centrepiece, a rather battered fern, wilts gamely in the limelight. You and a dozen other hopefuls huddle around with sketchbooks, the room humming with the anxious energy of people determined not to be the worst artist present. At the head of the table sits Mrs. Fielding, self-declared president of the Sketching Society, resplendent in an apron streaked with pastel. She insists that art is for everyone. But you sense that deep down, she'd prefer it if everyone else did slightly worse than her. She rings a little bell to commence, herding the room into silence, save for the scratching of pencils and the gentle gasps as someone realizes they've run out of eraser and dignity. The rules are simple. Draw what you see, not what you wish to see. This is a challenge when what you see is a fern clinging to life like an aging actress at her final curtain call. You glance at your neighbour's paper, only to realize she's drawn a majestic stag, pure fantasy. But no one dares challenge her artistic interpretation. Mr. Digby, 3 places down, seems to be sketching the fern from memory, or possibly from a previous life. His creation is a work of abstract genius, or perhaps an indictment of ferns everywhere. Conversation flows as steadily as the sherry. What a bold use of shadow, Mrs. Pickering. Is that a fern? Or, yes, it's supposed to look like that. Compliments are exchanged with the careful phrasing of battlefield diplomacy. The truth is, nobody is entirely sure what ferns look like, and those who do are too polite to say. Midway through, disaster strikes, a dropped pencil, an overturned ink bottle, and a heated debate about the relative merits of charcoal versus watercolours. Mrs. Fielding attempts to demonstrate perspective by stacking teacups, which promptly collapse, nearly decapitating the fern and sending everyone into a fit of giggles. There's something about the combination of creative failure and company that is oddly liberating. You're all in this together, floundering through foliage and friendship. As the evening wears on, attention wanes. Someone sketches the cat, who has posed itself on a velvet cushion, far more regal than any fern. Mr. Digby tries his hand at caricature, producing a remarkably unflattering likeness of Colonel Bramble that everyone agrees is quite spirited. The Colonel, in turn, retaliates with a sketch of Mr. Digby's nose, enlarged for artistic effect. Soon, tea and biscuits make their rounds, and conversation drifts from the trials of art to the woes of life. Leaky roofs, rebellious children, and the alarming frequency with which ferns seem to perish under one's care. Mrs. Fielding circulates with encouragement for all, collecting finished works for the archive. A mysterious drawer rumoured to have never been opened. At the end of the night, you survey your creation, a misshapen, heroic little Fern rendered in more hope than skill. There is a collective sigh of relief as Mrs. Fielding assures you all that talent is overrated and that true art comes from the heart. Though it's hard not to notice she's already spirited her own sketch safely away. You depart into the evening air, sketchbook tucked under your arm, cheeks warm from laughter and embarrassment, with the firm conviction that while not everyone is born to be an artist, everyone deserves good company and a Fern to draw badly. In Victorian England, that's more than enough. Today's cutting-edge hobby involves standing completely still for 7 minutes while an uncle's new camera attempts to immortalize your soul and perhaps steal it, depending on family superstition. Victorian photography is not so much an art as it is a group exercise in endurance and suspicion. The moment your uncle acquires his prized wet plate collodion camera, life as you know it changes. No family gathering is safe. Meals are interrupted, walks are waylaid, and the phrase "hold that pose" takes on the urgency of a military command. Somewhere between the soup course and dessert, you are drafted, willing or not, into a household tableau. Your job to remain perfectly motionless while Uncle Arthur fiddles with a lens the size of a teacup. The process itself is both theatrical and mildly terrifying. First, the room is rearranged, sofa dragged into the brightest patch of sunlight, all houseplants exiled to the hallway, and the dog forcibly ejected after last time's incident with the developing fluid. Subjects are arranged with geometric precision. Tallest in the back, youngest in front, and anyone with a tendency to fidget is wedged firmly between two large relatives. The photographer, meanwhile, swaddles himself in a black cloth, muttering like a medieval wizard, and vanishes behind the camera. Then comes the hardest part: waiting. The average Victorian exposure is several minutes long. Enough time to contemplate your own mortality, review your posture, and develop a seething resentment for your siblings. Smiles are discouraged. They blur too easily. Instead, you are instructed to adopt a dignified expression, which in practice means a look of mild constipation or existential dread. Eyes must not blink, hands must not twitch, and under no circumstances are you to sneeze, lest you doom the entire photograph to the bin. Grandmother, having survived childbirth, war, and 5 separate coronations, breaks only under the strain of suppressing a cough. Naturally, technology breeds superstition. There are rumors that cameras steal your soul, or at the very least trap a bit of your spirit in glass. Children are bribed with toffees to remain still, while older aunts cross themselves discreetly when Uncle Arthur begins counting down from 10. The cat, sensing opportunity, slinks into the frame at the last second, dooming yet another family portrait to feature a blurry, supernatural streak of fur. If the photograph turns out, miracle of miracles, the excitement is palpable. The resulting image, sepia-toned and slightly out of focus, is studied like the Dead Sea Scrolls. My, don't you look solemn? Who's that in the corner? Was that chair always there? There is endless debate over whether Aunt Ethel blinked, or whether that shadow in the background is merely the ghost of last year's Christmas pudding. But amateur photography isn't confined to the parlor. The truly adventurous haul their cameras outdoors, enlisting friends and strangers to pose beside trees, bridges, and even livestock. The equipment is cumbersome. Glass plates, tripods, bottles of chemical solutions that could double as paint remover. Yet the thrill of capturing the moment outweighs the inconvenience. The resulting images may be crooked, the clouds always threatening rain, and at least one subject guaranteed to look haunted. But the sense of achievement is unmatched. In time, the family albums swell with photographic evidence of growing children, changing fashions, and pets in various stages of irritation. Portraits become cherished keepsakes. reminders of the sheer effort required to look serious for 7 minutes at a time. Years later, you'll leaf through the pages, remembering not just the faces, but the laughter, the chaos, and the collective willpower that went into every image. Because in Victorian England, amateur photography wasn't just a pastime, it was an ordeal, a ritual, and a testament to the family's ability to endure boredom and embarrassment together. And if the camera really did steal a bit of your soul, at least it kept it safe, pressed between the pages of the family album for generations to come. It's movie night, Victorian style. You're squinting at flickering images projected onto a sheet while the local inventor insists this is the future of entertainment. The popcorn is just boiled turnips. But you clap anyway. The drawing room has been transformed into a palace of technological marvels. Or at least, that's how it's billed in the hand-drawn flyer your neighbor pressed into your hand 3 days ago. The air buzzes with anticipation, and possibly with static, as chairs are dragged into haphazard rows. Someone's uncle lugs in a mysterious contraption that looks like the offspring of a telescope and a wood stove, announcing, "This, my friends, is the magic lantern. Prepare to be astounded." Half the crowd isn't sure if they're here to see a light show or accidentally witness a séance. The lights are dimmed, candles snuffed with much ceremony. The children hush, and the makeshift curtain, a sheet borrowed from the best guest room, billows in the draught. Our host, Mr. Frobisher, clears his throat and, with the solemnity of an archbishop, unveils the first slide, an artistically hand-painted scene of Venice glowing eerily in the beam. There are gasps, applause, and at least one faint shriek when the slide changes abruptly to a dramatic tableau of the ghostly coachman, complete with smoke effects courtesy of a nearby incense stick. No one is entirely certain how the magic lantern works. Mr. Frobisher speaks of phantasmagoria and optical wonders as he feeds delicate glass slides into the machine, occasionally pausing to adjust the focus or retrieve a rogue moth. The slides, some painted with care, others with the enthusiasm of a sleep-deprived child, cycle through landscapes, portraits, biblical scenes, and, inevitably, a cautionary fable about what happens if you don't finish your vegetables. Each new image is accompanied by dramatic narration, which the children find thrilling and the adults find hilarious for entirely different reasons. The show's true magic, however, is in the communal experience. The entire family, plus assorted neighbors, a stray governess, and someone who might be the vicar but refuses to remove his hat, are packed into one room, united in squinting at the makeshift screen and shivering when the door opens to let in more viewers. The atmosphere is part theatre, part circus, and part lecture on why progress is both marvelous and, frankly, a little bit alarming. Intermission is called when the lantern overheats, filling the room with the scent of singed hair and adventure. Refreshments are handed round, tepid lemonade, rock-hard biscuits, and a steaming bowl of turnip popcorn, which is precisely as disappointing as it sounds. During the break, Mr. Frobisher expounds on the potential of moving pictures, insisting that one day entire plays, stories, and news from distant lands will be shown this way, sparking debate, disbelief, and at least one grandmother's whispered assertion that it's all devilry. When the show resumes, the audience is treated to a series of animated slides, a juggler tossing balls, a train rushing toward the audience, and a cleverly painted transformation of Dr. Jekyll into Mr. Hyde. The illusion of movement is both enchanting and faintly terrifying. A few children hide behind their mothers' skirts. The adults, for their part, try not to look too startled when the juggler's face morphs into a pumpkin. The evening ends in a flurry of applause, nervous laughter, and vows to come back next week for The Wonders of the Nile. As you make your way home, squinting against the darkness, you realize you've just witnessed the dawn of movie night, chaotic, communal, and far more thrilling than boiled turnips have any right to be. Because in the Victorian era, even a flickering image on a bedsheet could bring a little magic, a lot of laughter, and a sense of wonder that lingers long after the lantern has gone dark. This weekend's entertainment involves rodents, questionable bets, and the local constable pretending not to notice. The line between sport and public menace is as blurry as your vision after 3 pints. It's Saturday afternoon in Victorian England, and the green is alive with shouts, laughter, and the high-pitched squeak of indignant animals. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation, and the unmistakable aroma of spilled ale and sawdust. Crowds gather around makeshift arenas, wooden pens for rat baiting, chalked circles for ferret legging, and anywhere with a flat surface for impromptu dog versus goose exhibitions. If you came for refinement, you took a wrong turn at the cricket pitch. First up, ferret legging, a contest so uniquely Victorian it might as well come with a free moustache comb. The rules are as simple as they are deranged. Each participant secures a live ferret inside their trousers and attempts to endure the resulting chaos for as long as possible. The winner is the last person standing, or, more accurately, the last person not fleeing for the nearest outhouse. Bets are placed, cheers are shouted, and more than one competitor is seen clutching the bar for liquid courage before stepping up to the line. Somewhere, a grandmother shakes her head and mutters, "In my day, we played with marbles." Rat baiting, meanwhile, draws an even rowdier crowd. A ringmaster, usually the landlord or someone who looks as though he was born in a waistcoat, steps into the pit and announces the main event. Terriers are unleashed into a pen of rats, and the stopwatch starts. The object is simple, if gruesome. Which dog can dispatch the most rodents in the least time? Wagers fly, children are hoisted onto shoulders for a better view, and at least one local lady faints with theatrical precision. There are rules, technically, but enforcement is lax and mostly consists of the constable looking the other way, while quietly placing his own bet on Nipper, the champion. If these spectacles aren't enough, there are side shows aplenty. Goose pulling, badger teasing, and, if the mood is especially riotous, a toad race or two. Each event draws its own faithful. Gentlemen with gold watch chains and dubious morals, working men eager for a laugh, and women torn between scandalized outrage and genuine curiosity. The noise is deafening, the excitement contagious, the boundary between sport and shenanigan non-existent. The air is thick with banter and the rattle of coins. Victorians, who could debate the morality of everything from soup to sunbathing, see no contradiction in cheering on a spectacle that would give their clergyman heartburn. Even so, there's a peculiar camaraderie in the chaos. Strangers become fast friends over a shared laugh at a terrier's antics or a ferret's daring escape attempt. And when a rat outsmarts its pursuers and scurries under the gin tent, the resulting pandemonium unites everyone in a common cause, the urgent need to leap onto benches and shriek. But make no mistake, for all its rowdiness, animal sport is big business. Winnings are pooled and lost in equal measure. Tall tales of last week's upsets are traded with glee. Champions, whether canine, rodent, or vaguely heroic pub-goer, are toasted and commemorated, at least until the next round of betting begins. As the sun sets and the crowds thin, the last victorious and mildly traumatized ferret is extracted. The last bet is paid, and the local constable finally allows himself a grin. You head home with muddy boots, empty pockets, and enough stories to horrify the vicar and amuse your mates for weeks. Because in Victorian England, sportsmanship meant grit, wit, and a willingness to endure the unthinkable, often inside your own trousers. You are volunteered for a local fundraiser, which is mostly an excuse for fortune-telling, competitive cake baking, and the opportunity to see Mrs. Browning lose her temper when her sponge is snubbed by the vicar. Victorian charity bazaars are less about the needy and more about the neighbourhood's need for drama. Your involvement begins with an invitation that is, in reality, a demand, handwritten by Mrs. Eggleton in looping script and delivered with the steely smile of someone who knows where you keep your sherry. Resistance is futile. By Saturday morning, you're elbow deep in bunting, price tags, and last-minute reminders to please wear a hat, but nothing too cheerful. The church hall, usually a tomb of quiet respectability, is transformed into a carnival of chaos. Stalls line the walls, each manned by a local with a mission. There's the brick, a brack table, a bewildering landscape of chipped china and mysterious brass objects that may or may not be medical devices. The bookstall features dog-eared copies of sermons and a single romance novel kept discreetly under the counter for those brave enough to ask. But the real action is at the cake table. Bakers arrive early, bearing towering sponges, elaborate tarts, and the occasional bread pudding with a density rivaling dark matter. Mrs. Browning's sponge is, as always, the centerpiece, fluffy, golden, and positioned under its own lace doily like the Queen herself. Competition is fierce. The judging is theoretically impartial. But everyone knows the vicar's sweet tooth is swayed by flattery and strategic gossip. Tension simmers. When the results are announced, there is applause, tears, and, if Mrs. Browning is denied the top prize, the distant clatter of teacups as she retreats to the cloakroom to plan her revenge. Next to the cakes is the fortune-teller's tent, Mrs. Abernathy's boudoir, reimagined with scarves and incense. For a penny, she'll read your palm and promise vague success, good weather, and the possibility of an unexpected inheritance. News which, by some coincidence, reaches Mrs. Potts minutes after her mysterious Aunt Winifred is seen coughing in the garden. Lines form quickly, with villagers eager for prophecy or just the thrill of being told they'll soon meet a tall, dark stranger, which in these parts is code for the postman. Games and raffles abound. The tombola is a whirl of ticket stubs and underwhelming prizes, tin spoons, last year's calendar, and a single knitted owl that reappears at every bazaar, silently judging all who fail to win it. Children flock to the guess the weight of the cake contest, while adults gather for the white elephant auction, where competitive bidding can reach fever pitch for a pair of mismatched candlesticks or a slightly bent poker. As the day wears on, alliances form and dissolve over cups of watery tea and questionable lemonade. There are whispers of cake sabotage. Someone's meringues have mysteriously collapsed. Hints of romantic intrigue, and at least one accusation of ticket tampering when the raffle is won, again, by the curate's sister, Mrs. Browning, now fortified with sherry, stages a comeback by buying every last sausage roll, thereby securing her status as the bazaar's true victor, regardless of the sponge cake outcome. By sundown, the hall is littered with crumbs, spent fortunes, and the satisfied sighs of a village that has once again survived the treacherous waters of charity fundraising. You stumble home, pockets lighter, hat askew, and already anticipating next year's invitation, because in Victorian England, a charity bazaar is less about giving and more about surviving with your dignity and your sponge intact. It's the grand finale. The entire village gathers to watch fireworks that may or may not have been tested beforehand. Prepare for excitement, minor burns, and a story that will be told for decades, mostly as a warning. The night begins with the kind of crisp air that feels like it's been sharpened with a whetstone. The sun has dipped below the fields, the sky has turned that deep, inky blue, and the whole village is pouring into the common green like moths to a very loud, very dangerous flame. Lanterns swing from hands, children bounce with wild-eyed anticipation, and the adults pretend they're just here for the community spirit, while secretly hoping to see something explode in a way that feels slightly illegal. This is Victorian entertainment at its purest, a crowd, a fire, and the promise of controlled chaos. Except the controlled part is mostly ceremonial. You arrive wrapped in layers, holding a mug of something warm, tea, cider, or a suspicious homemade brew that tastes like apples and regret. Somewhere in the crowd, Mrs. Dunsworthy is loudly reminding everyone that fireworks are not safe, while simultaneously inching closer to the front so she doesn't miss a single spark. The vicar stands nearby with the haunted expression of a man who knows that by midnight he will be forced to bless someone's singed eyebrows. At the edge of the field sits the fireworks team. And when I say team, I mean 3 men who look like they've been inhaling gunpowder for the last 20 years and have never once lost a dare. They've set up a launch area that consists of a few wooden stakes, a crate of fireworks, and a general attitude of it'll be fine. There is no safety barrier. There is no proper distance marker. Someone has drawn a line in the grass with a stick, and everyone is politely ignoring it. Let's talk about the fireworks themselves. These are not the sleek, regulated modern displays you're used to. Clean launches, beautiful patterns, and absolutely no chance of a flaming object landing in your lap. Victorian fireworks are homemade chaos tubes. You can't always be sure if the rocket will shoot upward, sideways, or directly into the mayor's hat. The chemistry is adventurous. The craftsmanship is hopeful. The testing phase is non-existent. The first firework is lit. There's a long hiss, a small pop, a pause so awkward the whole crowd holds its breath, like someone forgot the ending. And then, bang! A rocket launches into the air, wobbles like it's reconsidering its life choices, and explodes into a burst of red sparks that makes everyone gasp and cheer. Children squeal. Adults clap like they've just witnessed the birth of modern science. And for a brief moment, it's beautiful, glittering embers raining down like little fragments of joy. The whole village united in wonder. Then comes the second rocket. This one does not share the first rocket's commitment to the sky. It shoots forward at a low angle like an angry comet, skimming the crowd and sending people scattering in slow-motion panic. Someone screams, "Duck!" even though nobody actually ducks. They just shuffle in a confused cluster. Clutching their mugs and dignity, the rocket smacks into a tree, detonates with a violent crack, and suddenly the entire village is watching a small oak experience, what can only be described as targeted arson. The fireworks team argues quietly about whether that was supposed to happen. They decide it was. Now the show truly begins. Roman candles spit out flaming balls like they're possessed. Catherine wheels are nailed to wooden posts and spin wildly, spraying sparks into the faces of anyone who got too close because they wanted a better view. There's always one child, always, who runs forward to pick something up and is dragged back by their collar like a mischievous terrier. People laugh nervously while stepping backward in perfect Victorian politeness, even as their survival instincts scream. And then the grand finale is announced. The grand finale is always the most dangerous, because it involves the most gunpowder and the least planning. They light it. It hisses louder than before. The crowd hushes. The vicar crosses himself. Mrs. Dunsworthy mutters, "I knew it," like she's been waiting for this moment all her life. And then the sky erupts. Massive bursts of gold and white crackling overhead, illuminating the village in flashes like divine lightning. People cheer, faces glowing, mouths open in pure awe. For a moment, it feels like the world is magic. And then, because this is Victorian fun, the final firework misfires. It detonates on the ground with a sound like a cannon blast, sending a shower of sparks into the air and igniting the edge of someone's picnic blanket. Chaos erupts. Someone throws a hat on the flames. Someone else throws cider. A dog barks, like it's trying to call the fire brigade itself. The fireworks team swears loudly and tries to stamp out the mess while insisting everyone stay calm, which only makes the panic more theatrical. Eventually, the fire is extinguished. Everyone breathes again, The crowd breaks into relieved laughter, and half the village immediately starts telling the story like it's already folklore. And as you walk home under a smoky sky, ears ringing, cheeks warm from the cold and excitement, you realize something very important. Victorian fireworks weren't just entertainment. They were a social ritual, a communal thrill, a shared act of bravery. Because nothing brings people together like standing in a field at night, watching amateur explosives, and collectively agreeing, well, that didn't kill us. So I suppose it was lovely. Tonight, you're invited to a scientific demonstration hosted by a local eccentric who believes electricity is the future and also a cure for gout. Expect to watch frogs twitch on silver platters, receive a mild static shock, and pretend you understand anything about magnetism while everyone applauds politely and hopes the curtains don't catch fire. It's the height of Victorian intellectual curiosity, and you find yourself crammed into Sir Egbert Tunstall's drawing room, redecorated for the occasion with borrowed blackboards, stacks of philosophical transactions, and a mysterious arrangement of wires that look suspiciously like a trap for burglars. The room hums with anticipation, not just for scientific marvels, but for the inevitable moment when Sir Egbert will attempt to use his galvanometer as a punchline. The crowd, ladies in lace, gentlemen with well-waxed moustaches, and at least two doctors eager to criticize, murmurs with the excitement of people who sense they might survive the evening with both knowledge and their eyebrows intact. The demonstration begins with a lecture. Every Victorian event starts with a lecture on the wonders of electricity. Sir Egbert paces, monologues, and brandishes a Leyden jar, pausing only to glare at anyone caught yawning. "Behold," he declares, attaching electrodes to a pair of unfortunate frog legs laid out on the family silver. With a flourish, he turns a crank, and the legs leap as if possessed by the ghost of Napoleon. The audience gasps. Mrs. Featherstone swoons. The frog legs, it must be said, steal the show. From there, the experiments become increasingly ambitious and hazardous. Glass rods are rubbed with silk until sparks fly, and everyone in the front row starts to eye the curtains nervously. Children are invited up to feel the power of science, which in practice means having their hair stand on end and receiving a mild jolt that leaves them blinking in confusion and delight. Perfectly harmless, Sir Egbert assures their mothers, who clutch their pearls and prepare to write strongly worded letters to the Times. Magnetism is next on the agenda. A horseshoe magnet is produced, and objects from around the room are presented to see what will stick. Coins, hairpins, teaspoons, yes, Uncle Basil's glass eye. No, to everyone's relief. Sir Egbert attempts to explain polarity, only to be interrupted by his own cat, who jumps onto the demonstration table, scattering frog legs, magnets, and the better part of a sandwich onto the floor. The cat is pronounced uncharged, though slightly affronted. The climax of the evening is the great electric chain. Guests are invited to form a circle, join hands, and brace for what Sir Egbert calls a tickle from the future. A wire is added, the crank is turned, and the chain receives a unified zap that prompts giggles, gasps, and a round of applause that's only slightly tinged with relief that no one caught fire. Sir Egbert beams. "Progress, ladies and gentlemen. The world is at our fingertips, or at least a small tingle. Throughout the night, refreshments circulate, lemonade, sherry, and plates of little cakes decorated with lightning bolts in alarming blue icing. There's much debate about the practical uses of electricity. Lighting homes, reviving comatose frogs, or perhaps someday sending messages across the country at the speed of, well, a shocked guest leaping away from the demonstration table. As you make your way home under the gas lamps, tingling fingers and all, you realize you've witnessed the very edge of Victorian science. half revelation, half accidental comedy, and wholly unforgettable. Because in this era, progress is measured in shocks, sparks, and the cheerful certainty that next week's soiree will be even more electrifying. The river has frozen over, which means it's time to strap tiny knives to your boots and risk everything for 5 seconds of unsteady glory. Victorian ice skating is a grand public event, part sport, part fashion parade, part hospital waiting list, where success is measured by how many times you fall and whether your hat stays on. It's the social event of the winter, and the whole town turns out, cheeks rosy and spirits high, to see who will triumph over nature and who will be carried home with a sprained ankle and a story to tell for years. You arrive wrapped in layers of wool, clutching your mother's hand, if you're young, or a flask of brandy, if you're wise. The ice gleams, treacherous and inviting, dotted with the silhouettes of brave souls testing their courage and the tensile strength of their outerwear. Before you even touch the ice, there is the matter of preparation. Skates are produced from mysterious boxes, leather boots with blades that look suspiciously like repurposed cutlery. For the truly fashionable, skates are adorned with tiny silver flourishes or fur trim, never mind the fact that fur and freezing water are natural enemies. Getting the skates on is a feat of engineering and endurance, involving buckles, straps, and no less than 3 relatives offering contradictory advice. By the time you've managed it, you're both exhausted and too numb to feel your toes, a blessing, as you'll soon discover. And then, the main event. Stepping onto the ice. The first moment is always one of hope and trepidation. As you launch yourself forward, arms windmilling like a semaphore operator, signaling distress. You glide for half a second, then immediately overcorrect, wobble, and cling to the nearest available surface, tree branch, fence post, or startled fellow skater. Children dash by with terrifying confidence, performing spins, jumps, and the occasional reckless race. The more ambitious adults attempt elegant arabesques and, more often than not, end up executing elaborate pratfalls to the delight of the watching crowd. The ice itself is a treacherous canvas. Some patches glassy and smooth, others rough and cracked, punctuated by the frozen footprints of yesterday's ducks. Local legends claim that the river never truly freezes evenly. So, skating is always a gamble. Some brave soul invariably tests the limits of the ice and is greeted by a chorus of shrieks, laughter, and stern warnings about the dangers of hypothermia, delivered with the gusto of those safely on shore. But skating is only half the spectacle. The real show is in the fashion. Ladies in sweeping skirts and velvet capes twirl gracefully, or attempt to, hats perched at improbable angles, mufflers fluttering in the breeze. Gentlemen sport brightly colored scarves, dashing gloves, and expressions of determined nonchalance that falter only when gravity calls. Every so often, a hat is claimed by a gust of wind and sails across the river, prompting impromptu chases and displays of gallantry, as would-be heroes attempt to rescue and occasionally end up needing rescue themselves. On the sidelines, families huddle with baskets of gingerbread and bottles of mulled wine, warming cold fingers and offering encouragement or gentle mockery to the skaters. The local physician sets up a triage station by the reeds, dispensing bandages and advice. Next time, keep your knees bent and your pride in check. The soundscape is a symphony of laughter, the scrape of blades, and the distant cries of Timothy, "Let go of your sister." As dusk falls, the ice glows gold in the lamplight. You shed your skates, aching and exhilarated, proud to have survived with only minor bruising and your hat more or less intact. You limp home, already planning next year's debut and vowing to practice in secret, because in the Victorian era, the only thing more important than skating with grace is falling with style and making sure everyone sees you do it. You find yourself elbow deep in sawdust and glass eyes at the weekly Taxidermy Club, where fun is defined by how lifelike you can make a vole look. Every failed project is a new species, and there's always one guy who insists on giving his creations tiny hats and tragic backstories. It's a Wednesday evening, and the drawing room has been transformed into a menagerie of half-finished creatures and creative ambition. The table is crowded with jars of pins, mysterious powders, and a pile of what may have once been respectable woodland residents. There is a faint smell of mothballs and determination in the air. Mrs. Eggleton presides at the head of the table. Her hands nimble, her gaze sharp, and her squirrel, Sir Nutters, sporting a waistcoat that's neater than most of the club members. You are handed a vole, a humble specimen with the startled expression of one who never expected to become immortal art. The process begins. Skin carefully peeled, sawdust packed inside like stuffing a Christmas goose, and limbs positioned in poses somewhere between naturalistic and was startled mid-waltz. The more experienced members offer advice. More wire in the tail, too much glass eye, not enough soul. If the whiskers go crooked, just say he's from the circus. No one dares ask about the source of the mysterious antlers now glued onto a small rabbit. It quickly becomes clear that Victorian taxidermy is less about realism and more about creativity. Sometimes unhinged creativity. The club's unofficial motto is lifelike, or at least lively. What begins as a tribute to nature ends up as an exercise in storytelling. Mr. Fothergill, a banker by day and mad artist by night, proudly unveils his magnum opus, a family of mice engaged in a tea party, complete with thimbles for cups and one particularly anxious-looking hedgehog serving as the butler. Conversations drift as hands work. Stories about the most dramatic fox ever mounted, rumours of a mummified cat from the Abbey, and passionate debates about the ethics of putting waistcoats on stoats. There is always one member who claims to have seen a taxidermied dog so lifelike it barked at the mailman, and another who quietly corrects posture on a robin, muttering about avian dignity. Friendly rivalry is fierce, especially during the club's annual Best in Show, where victory is judged by applause, gasps, and, once, a fainting spell caused by an especially menacing mole. It's not all fun and sawdust. Sometimes the outcome is unexpected. A weasel, stuffed in haste, comes out with a sly grin that haunts your dreams. A frog, overstuffed, bears an uncanny resemblance to your great-uncle. Glass eyes go in backwards, and suddenly your squirrel looks like it's been startled by the afterlife. Mistakes are not just common, they're celebrated. Every new species is a discovery, Mrs. Eggleton declares. Victorian England is the land of monsters, after all. Refreshments are served. Ginger biscuits, weak tea, and a stern warning not to dip anything into the borax. At the end of the evening, everyone lines up their creations for the customary viewing. There are applause, laughter, and more than a few murmurs of, well, it's certainly neat. The creations are paraded, named, and, in the case of one unfortunate bat, quietly reclassified as abstract art. As you wrap your own vole in a handkerchief to take home, you realize the magic isn't just in the finished product. It's in the shared absurdity, the gentle rivalry, and the delight of seeing a room full of adults debate whether a shrew's hat should be blue or plaid. Because in the Victorian Taxidermy Club, the pursuit of immortal squirrels is really just the pursuit of good company. And a story that grows wilder with every retelling. Botany is the hottest craze, and your social standing now depends on your ability to nurture ferns in a glass case that costs more than your yearly income. Every conversation devolves into arguments about humidity and leaf patterns, and you haven't truly suffered until you've tried to transport a potted aspidistra on the omnibus in the rain. Welcome to Fern fever, a social epidemic more contagious than gossip and twice as ruinous to your furniture. You can blame Queen Victoria herself, whose fondness for ferns launched 1,000 glass cases, each one lovingly tended, obsessively dusted, and discussed with a seriousness usually reserved for international diplomacy. Across England, drawing rooms are overtaken by fronds, spores, and nervous hosts peeking behind velvet curtains to ensure their asplenium isn't wilting in front of guests. Your personal Wardian case, for the uninitiated, a miniature greenhouse, the Victorian equivalent of a designer handbag, is the centerpiece of your existence. You polish its glass daily and whisper words of encouragement to your polypodium. You adjust its vents with the skill of a naval engineer, ever vigilant for the dreaded fogging, which, in Victorian circles, is a crisis akin to finding a mouse in the blancmange. The weekly meetings of your local fern fancying society are a masterclass in polite competition and plant-related subterfuge. The group is divided into factions. Team Lady Fern versus Team Maidenhair, each side fiercely loyal, each claiming their chosen frond is both hardier and more aesthetically pleasing. Conversations spiral from the best recipes for soil. Bat droppings or nothing, insists Colonel Dewhurst, to the optimal times to mist a scaly polystichum. Mrs. Fenwick, last year's winner of the Golden Frond, is rumoured to have imported her compost from Paris, a scandal that still sets tongues wagging over tea. Of course, fern mania is not limited to the privileged. Even the working classes catch the fever, stuffing windowsills with aspidistras and daring bracken. Shopkeepers stock special fern hunting gear, spades, baskets, and pamphlets with titles like Ferns and How to Court Them. You, too, have spent a rainy Saturday clambering through mud and bramble, chasing rumours of a rare specimen lurking in the county woods, only to return with 2 stings, a sodden boot, and a rather ordinary heart's tongue fern that refuses to thrive out of sheer spite. The transport of these precious plants is an ordeal worthy of epic poetry. Rain, mud, the jostling of the omnibus, each hazard threatens disaster. Your aspidistra sways perilously with every bump, while the other passengers eye your vegetable cargo as though you're smuggling a nest of adders. Upon arrival, you apologize to your fern for the trauma. Wipe the glass case with the sleeve of your best coat, and hope no one witnessed you weeping quietly at the loss of a single heroic frond. Back home, fern care is both ritual and obsession. You debate the merits of east-facing windows and sing gentle lullabies to your juvenile fronds at dawn. The family cat, never one to respect boundaries, plots nightly raids. Every new leaf is cause for a celebration, and a round of cryptic, self-congratulatory letters to your rival, hinting at unprecedented vigor. Fads come and go, but fern mania leaves its mark. Literally, by year's end, your wallpaper is patterned with ferns, your teacups sport delicate frond designs, and even your biscuit tins echo the obsession. You dream in green, you think in spores, and your social diary is packed with appointments for showings, swaps, and the occasional emergency fern intervention. Because in Victorian England, the cultivation of ferns isn't just a hobby, it's a test of patience, a display of status, and a gentle, leafy battle for botanical glory. All aboard for a midnight adventure. Victorian Excursion trains promise glamour, scenery, and a guaranteed lack of sleep as you rattle through the countryside on a bench designed by someone who clearly hated comfort. The true fun is trying to nap while being serenaded by the clattering wheels, rowdy honeymooners, and the distant, hopeful whistle of the tea cart. Your evening begins with excitement and trepidation at the station. Gas lamps flicker, casting long shadows on a throng of passengers in their travel best. Ladies in bonnets and shawls, gentlemen in cravats and over-ambition, and children clutching sticky buns like survival rations. The locomotive stands gleaming, hissing clouds of steam and promise. Porters dash about, barking unintelligible orders and loading mountains of trunks, umbrellas, and, inevitably, a hat box that refuses to fit anywhere sensible. You find your compartment, a carriage with velvet upholstery, slightly damp, wooden benches, entirely unpadded, and windows that refuse to open or close at any logical moment. The luggage rack above is just high enough to encourage head injuries. The excitement of travel is palpable, with only the faintest undertone of dread as you realize you are about to spend 8 hours trapped with 7 strangers, a caged canary, and an elderly man who claims to have invented the sandwich. As the train lurches into motion, the night adventure begins in earnest. Outside, the moonlit countryside flashes by, silvery fields, shadowy woods, and the occasional startled sheep. Inside, life is considerably less serene. Your fellow passengers immediately sort themselves into 2 camps. The hopeful sleepers, who fashion elaborate nests from shawls and prayer, and the die-hard revelers, who have decided that tonight is the perfect time for cards, stories, and loud renditions of On il clamour Bartat. Sleep, of course, is theoretical. The rhythmic clatter of wheels is interrupted by sudden jolts, piercing whistles, and the conductor's periodic demands to see your ticket at 2 a.m., just as you begin to dream of peace. The bench, marvel of Victorian engineering, is a masterclass in discomfort. You try to wedge yourself into a position that is both restful and dignified, failing on both counts. Your head nods forward, your hat slides down. You wake yourself snoring and hope nobody noticed. Though from the looks exchanged in the dim carriage, they absolutely did. The train is a living organism, each carriage with its own character. In one, a honeymoon couple giggles and whispers, passing sweets and furtive kisses. In another, a group of university men attempt to outwit the tea cart lady, whose refusal to make change is legendary. A child somewhere wails, setting off a chain reaction of sympathy and muffled irritation. The tea cart appears at improbable hours, offering weak tea, suspect sandwiches, and biscuits so hard they might qualify as building materials. As dawn nears, everyone looks a little frayed but strangely triumphant. There is camaraderie in shared exhaustion. You compare notes with your fellow travelers, who saw the owl swoop past, who caught a glimpse of the distant hills in moonlight, who survived the journey with their ankles unbruised by the conductor's boot. Finally, the train screeches into its destination, sun rising over a landscape both new and deeply familiar, fields, towns, and your own growing longing for a real bed. You disembark, slightly hunched, blinking in the early light, hat askew and hair resembling something from a cautionary tale. But you've done it. You survived the all-night train excursion. You've been serenaded, sleep-deprived, jostled, jolted, and gently steamed for 8 hours straight. And as you stagger off into the sunrise, you know you've earned the right to call yourself a veteran of Victorian travel, sleep optional, stories guaranteed. So here we are, drifting back to the present, leaving behind the soot, the teacups, the 7 petticoats, and the faint but unmistakable scent of pickled herring that haunts every Victorian memory. You survived a full day in the 19th century and somehow managed not to be trampled by a penny farthing, out-cheated at whist, or arrested for the illegal possession of a pet ferret. Let's take a breath and give some overdue credit to the Victorians. Whatever they lacked in central heating, indoor plumbing, or the basic understanding of germs, they more than made up for in creativity, sheer stubbornness, and the ability to extract entertainment from a dead squirrel, a poorly tuned piano, or a biscuit that could break a tooth. Fun, for them, was an endurance sport, one played with corsets, social rules, and the ever-present risk of public embarrassment. Every parlor game, picnic disaster, and seance gone wrong was another reminder that laughter and survival were often the same thing. So tonight, as you nestle into a bed that, statistically, contains zero livestock, not a single hoop-rolling child, and hopefully no unexpected harmonicas, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to those who came before. To the Victorians who muddled through rain, rigid etiquette, and recreational electrocution, all in the pursuit of a good time. Because history isn't just about misery and mothballs, it's about people doing their best, finding joy in the absurd, and somehow passing it all down to us, bit by ridiculous bit. So be grateful for your modern sleep, your silent fan, and your total lack of urgent invitations to amateur dramatics. Rest easy knowing the only séance you'll attend tonight is the gentle, peaceful journey into dreams. Good night, and may your sleep be as deep as a Victorian punch bowl, without any of the floating lemon slices.